Hello and welcome to my podcast. My name is Peter Doherty. I'm a Catholic priest and a psychologist who integrates my training in psychology and scripture studies to help understand the Gospels from a psychological perspective and seek out new pastoral teachings for Christians in these modern times. My podcasts are between 7 to 10 minutes in length, where I share insights and reflections that I hope will be useful to you. Please don't hesitate to contact me with questions or comments. I'd love to hear from my listeners. Today's podcast is from Mark chapter 7, verse 1 to 8, 14 to 15, 21 to 23. This gospel will be read in churches September the 1st, 2024. Today's gospel reading is from a group of teachings where Mark describes Jesus challenging the Scribes and Pharisees about the practice of their faith. The Scribes and the Pharisees were not doing anything wrong. They were literally following the law and the traditions of their ancestors. The point that Jesus is making with them is that they are focusing on little details and missing the more important reality. This is not the only time that Jesus is criticized for not following the law. The Pharisees accused Jesus' disciples, of violating the Sabbath law when they plucked ears of grain to eat while they were walking through fields on the Sabbath. You can find this in Matthew chapter 12, verse 1 to 8, or Mark chapter 2, verse 23 to 28. Or Luke chapter 6, verse 1 to 5. Jesus was criticized for healing a man with a paralyzed hand on the Sabbath. Matthew 12, 9 to 14, Mark 3, 1 to 5, Luke 6, 6 to 11. Jesus was also criticized for eating with tax collectors and sinners, which was seen as associating with those who did not follow the law. Mark chapter 2, verse 15. Jesus often responded to these criticisms by emphasizing the spirit of the law over the strict literal interpretation. I wonder, though, what is the issue? Why does the issue come up so often in the Scriptures? I'd like to introduce you to Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg's work created a whole new field within psychology, and his theories became highly influential in the study of moral development. His research also provided the foundation for research on spiritual development. The fourth of the 6 stages of Kohlberg's theory is called authority and social order, maintaining orientation. At this stage, individuals uphold laws and rules to maintain the social order. Individuals at this level believe in respecting authority and fulfilling duties. Individuals at this level have the correct behaviors, but nothing else. There is no insight or even relationship to the values it focuses on to respect the social order. Just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with upholding the law and social order. Our society would collapse if we didn't have some semblance of order. The dilemma arises when people at this level run into problems with individuals who don't fit in or don't follow their perspective. There is often little room for compassion or empathy. Conversely, I suspect Jesus was operating at the 6th and highest level. This stage is called a universal ethical principle orientation. Individuals at this level follow self-chosen ethical principles that are universal, such as justice, dignity, and equality. These principles are abstract and not necessarily tied to existing laws. Kohlberg is not the only theory on moral development, nor is it without criticism. There are other theories. However, I chose Kohlberg as he is the first to develop the theory, and many other subsequent theories are based on his work. James Fowler and the Stages of Faith, The Psychology of Human Development and the Quest for Meaning, was first published in 1981. The book was later revised in 1995. Fowler, a theologian and a developmental psychologist, proposes that faith is a universal process of meaning-making that evolves through distinct stages over a person's lifetime. I want to focus on the stage that I suspect the Pharisees were operating. I think the Scribes and the Pharisees were operating at stage 3, known as the synthetic conventional faith. The age range for this level is between adolescence and young adulthood. The reason I think they were at this stage is because individuals at this level begin to synthesize beliefs and values from various sources, often conforming to the expectations of their community. Faith becomes more personal, but it is still largely unexamined and influenced by external authorities. This explanation may help us to better understand the context within which Jesus interacted with the Scribes and Pharisees. Throughout his encounters with them, Jesus was constantly trying to get the Pharisees and Scribes to examine their faith in God and go beyond appearances and their reliance on the law. It's valuable to pay attention to external authorities and seriously consider the points raised. But to make our spirituality real, we must embrace it, reflect on, and be open to experiences and challenges. Despite the fact that the Pharisees were older than adolescents, more likely middle age, their knowledge of God did not translate into an adult spirituality. Sadly, their spiritual development was too underdeveloped to allow them to recognize the Messiah when he was in their own midst. Jesus goes further in this gospel on the same theme by challenging the dietary restrictions laid down by the Torah. Jesus is interested in conversion rather than simple behavior. He is less concerned about what the people eat, but rather how they act. People are not defiled by what they eat, but rather by what they say and do. To give you some background, Jews had strict rules about what foods could be eaten. The most well-known of the forbidden animals are pigs. Most Jews do not eat pork. Dietary laws could be seen as a means to promote health and cleanliness. While pork might not seem harmful, their consumption was believed to lead to unsanitary conditions. Additional examples are birds of prey, that are not considered acceptable. Generally, domestic birds like chicken, turkeys, ducks, and geese are permissible. Only fish with fins and scales are kosher. This excludes all shellfish, such as shrimp, crab, lobster, and other non-scaled fish like catfish. No reptiles or amphibians make the list as kosher. Consuming blood is extremely forbidden, as mentioned in previous podcasts. Meat must be properly salted to remove blood, and eggs with blood spots are not kosher. Meat from animals that were not slaughtered according to kosher laws or have significant injuries or defects are also forbidden. Mixing meat and dairy products is also prohibited. This extends to cooking and consuming them together. Separate utensils and dishes are used for meat and dairy, and there are specific waiting periods between consuming one after the other. Utensils used to prepare non-kosher food, or that have been used for both meat and dairy, cannot be used for kosher food unless they undergo a specific purification process. Wine that may have been used for idolatrous practices is forbidden, and there are specific rules about wine produced by non-Jews. These laws are complex and detailed, often requiring extensive study and adherence to ensure compliance. Likely Jesus challenged these laws as they don't by themselves bring about a closer relationship with God. There may initially have been some valid reason for these laws before refrigeration, but the original purpose doesn't fit anymore. This gospel encourages us to go beyond the details and distractions and focus on what is important for us to develop faith. Thank you for listening. I invite you to join me next week when I examine the Gospel of Mark, who describes Jesus healing a man who was deaf and who had an impediment in his speech. If this is the first time you have heard my podcast and are interested in hearing more, I urge you to listen to my podcasts listed on the website. Every Sunday, I release a new podcast focusing on the gospel for the following week. I invite you to listen to all the podcasts, and I hope the reflections are useful to you. The podcast, A Psychologist Looks at Scripture, is found in most platforms that carry podcasts. The podcast is also available on YouTube. Please do not hesitate to leave a review. Feedback from my listeners can be helpful in the development of the podcast. I'd also like to thank my team, Heather Patel-Doherty and Richard Coulomb, who play an important part in the preparation for this podcast. If you have any questions or concerns, I can be reached by email at peter.doherty, O-M-I, that's D-O-H-E-R-T-Y-O-M-I, @gmail.com. God bless and have a great week.